Greetings, I'm Yvonne Stapp for Science for the Public, and I welcome you to our Contemporary Science Issues and Innovations program. What is the relationship between social media and the spike in teen anxiety, and what can be done about it? Today's guest may offer some answers. Clinical psychologist Jacqueline Sperling is director of the McLean Hospital Anxiety Mastery Program, and she teaches also psychology at the Harvard Medical School. Dr. Sperling specializes in treating teen anxiety disorders. She was cited in a recent McLean article regarding social media and teen anxiety, and today she'll discuss the problem. Dr. Sperling, thank you very much for joining us. It's a great pleasure.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
And I'd like to just open with some of the background about social media. What are some characteristics or the features of social media that are so attractive to people, so addictive to people?
Sure. Social media offers opportunities to share and connect, and there are additional factors that encourage users to spend more time on the platforms. It's the unpredictable nature of the programs that keep bringing users back. The unpredictable frequency of reinforcement, or a variable schedule, is the most reinforcing schedule. Not knowing how many likes one will get for one's post, what people will say, or what others are doing at different times facilitates more frequent checking and a dopamine feedback loop. Dopamine is a neurotransmitter involved in the reward center of the brain. A behavior that gets rewarded by the brain is likely to continue.
Right, I understand. And so was it features like the shares or the likes that are these characteristics of the social media? Are those the things that attract?
It also, those elements add to the uncertainty and the unpredictable nature, because you're not sure how many likes you will get for your post. You're not sure how many likes someone else will get for a post. Also, just in terms of the comments, being able to share things, what you will receive, what you will not receive. So there's all that uncertainty, and that lack of predictability is what often can keep people coming back.
Okay, so now between it depends on how you're counting, 2008 and 2018, or 2009, 2019, there was a very pronounced uptick in teen anxiety. And then it was attributed largely to social media. So you've just mentioned that there are these characteristics that keep people coming back for it. Then now educators and parents, authorities are very concerned about this uptick in anxiety. So you are a specialist on anxiety. What is the difference? Everybody experiences anxiety at some point. What causes it to make you need to see a psychologist?
Sure, right. Anxiety, right? It's a universal experience. Everyone experiences it, and it's also really adaptive. We need it. You need anxiety to help prepare you for the future. If students didn't experience anxiety, they wouldn't study for a test the next day. The thing is, you need it so that it's not bossing you around, right? And in terms of that, it's not taking over control of your life. So when you start to see anxiety start to get in the way, or maybe you're not socializing with peers as much, it's harder to get your work done, and you're spending extra amount of time on homework to the point where it's making you not get enough sleep, or it's changing your appetite, you're stopping your extracurricular activities, you're not able to focus in school. So there are different ways we might see it show up, and you're starting to see it get in the way of any areas of your life, with your friends, with school, with your family. That may be a time where additional support is warranted.
I see. So when you see this kind of anxiety, you say you get might depressed, or you can't get your work done, and so on. And so you then need to get some psychological help if possible. Now, that could happen to anybody, but why the pronounced problem with teenagers? And I keep seeing teenage girls in particular. Can you give us some insight there?
Well, I mean, there are a variety of different reasons why there may be an increased anxiety. I think there's also been
For
a tremendous
teens, yeah.
increase in awareness, which has been great. We still have room for growth on that, but there's also been an increase in awareness. And so that may then also drive up the numbers when people are aware, oh, this is actually what is going on. There are additional factors, in terms of adding to the loads of stress. If you would like me to bring it back to social media, I'm also happy to do that too, just in terms of how social media can contribute to that, and particularly for girls. Social media has been linked to depression, anxiety, low self-esteem, and body image concerns, particularly for those who identify as girls, and sleep disturbances. A key aspect, though, is to differentiate between the different types of social media used to determine which ones have that kind of impact. There's a difference between active and passive use, and even more specifically, self-oriented and other-oriented active and passive use and their impacts. So the self and active-oriented updates, such as updating a profile, are less linked to negative impacts on mood and self-esteem than the passive and other-oriented activities, such as scrolling through the newsfeed. A passive and other-oriented approach creates opportunities for social comparison that may negatively impact one's mood and self-concept. So, for example, a user may see that someone got more likes than a user did for a post. They may also see examples of social exclusion by viewing photos of friends gathering. Before the introduction of social media, students didn't know that they were excluded from social events unless someone explicitly told them that. Mm-hmm. Now they have examples of social exclusion when they see posts of friends gathering and they weren't invited to those events.
Yes, I see.
And in addition, the use of filters distorts viewers' perceptions of what realistic body types are, and this can negatively impact one's self-esteem and body image. And as I mentioned, particularly for those who identify as girls. And, as we've seen the increase in use of social media, that also is something that could be driving the increased anxiety.
Right, I see. So the teens are particularly vulnerable, and these kinds of self-image things make girls perhaps particularly prone to the anxiety that would ensue from that. Now, a lot of the schools, as I said, the Surgeon General in the United States, a lot of authorities have said 13 is too young for social media. They should restrict it until people are, say, 18 or 19. There's a great deal out there about that. Now, what is your view about that?
Well, adolescence is a developmental stage that involves significant physical, emotional, and cognitive development. Teens' bodies change at different paces, and their brains do not yet have fully developed frontal lobes, and those can act like brakes in the car. While all of these changes occur, another shift happens, which is an increase in importance in peers, and social media sites act like megaphones of these changes, with the frequent opportunities for social comparison, as well as quick ability to post something, perhaps before thinking through the consequences of the post. These changes can make youth more vulnerable to the negative impact of certain types of social media use. Specifically, research has found that ages 11 to 13 for females and 14 to 15 for males are particularly vulnerable periods. That's significant increases in social media use paired with decreases in life satisfaction. And researchers posited that the difference in timing may be because females tend to go through puberty earlier than boys do.
Yes.
Now, do I think that we need to prohibit youth from being able to access these sites? I think that could be something worth exploring. I think it's also worth exploring perhaps empowering youth with the information of what different types of use, the different types of use in which one can engage in social media and their potential negative impacts, so that they can be informed users. And then also that there can be conversations with parents to help them learn more about how their use is impacting themselves, and that there can be some monitoring as well.
I see. Now, when you deal with teens, since you run an anxiety program here, and presumably your work concentrate on teens, how do you deal with this? And do you see a lot of difficulty due to social media with teens, and how do you treat it?
In terms of the concerns of using social media?
Yes, your clinical work, yes.
Well, I think it depends on what is the actual concern. So, for example, if someone has social anxiety and they're having trouble connecting with peers, it may be that they, reaching out to someone directly through a social media app may feel more approachable than asking a question face to face in person. So maybe they can take baby steps and work their way up to having in-person interactions. So that may be one way of using it. But it also be important to find out how their social media use may be impacting their mood. If it's starting to make them feel worse about themselves, then we can reevaluate how they use it, and is there another approach that at least doesn't make them feel worse? And I'm happy to share more about those
Yes,
strategies if that would feel
please.
helpful.
Yes, I'd like to hear more.
Sure. Well, someone can do a self-assessment. So what you can do is rate your mood before you use a social media platform on a scale of 0 to 10, 10 being the most intensely you can experience an emotion, 0 not at all. So maybe you're a 7 happy, you're a 3 worried, you're a 4 sad. You then use an app or platform, and then pay attention to the types of use in which you're engaging. Active versus passive, self versus other oriented. And then after you use it, re-rate your mood. If you find that you're feeling more worried, sadder, even angrier, feeling worse after you use it, then you have data that might inspire some motivation for change. Now, what do you do then? How do you change that? There are certain strategies that one can implement, such as you can remain connected to people on these apps, yet unfollow them. So you don't see the posts that might potentially make you feel bad about yourself. So you can unfollow people. You can also mute their stories and their posts so you don't see certain updates. There are certain aspects of social media that can be positive. Perhaps there are volunteer organizations that are meaningful to you, and you can see certain events get posted that you then can attend that are important to you. Also, if there are favorite restaurants or community stores and you see that they have specials, that can be something that you follow, and then you schedule plans in real life with a friend. So there can be ways where it might actually not necessarily make you feel worse. And then once you make some of these changes, do the self-assessment again and keep doing this iterative process until you tailor your newsfeed to a way where at least doesn't make you feel worse.
Okay, so your strategy is sort of take control, right? Get control, understand the problem, and take control to manage this issue. Is that correct?
It's really to empower individuals to pay attention to how they're using it and to what they are exposed, right? We can't control everything that we
Of
see in the
course,
world,
yeah.
but if you're starting to notice that when you're logging on to these apps, that certain people's posts are making you feel bad about yourself, and that can also signal you. Maybe perhaps I remain connected with them as a direct connection, but I don't see their updates. And that can be a strategy that one implements. I think it's probably not realistic to just tell people to stop using these platforms altogether because of how pervasive they are. So then it's really about equipping users with tools to use these platforms in a way that at least don't make them feel worse.
Right. Do you notice anything like demographics as significant demographics or particular cultural differences? Because this is a nation with many different cultures. Do you notice any difference there, or is it across the board, this anxiety issue?
Cultures
With kids.
described as more collectivistic versus individualistic had higher rates of social media addiction in research. Those authors hypothesize that individuals in collectivistic cultures may experience both internal and societal pressures to use social media, whereas those from individualistic cultures may be more likely to experience just the former.
I see. So that can have some effect there, and personal features like whether you were a shy person or outgoing might make a difference too, I guess.
So the research actually, it's not shyness per se that might contribute to differences in how someone uses an app. It's what they found is that those who experience shyness tend to have fewer connections on social media use, and then they're also less likely to use an active approach, so more likely to use a passive approach. And so that's actually what might be explaining the lower ratings of well-being following social media use.
Okay, so would you repeat again that active and passive reaction or approach? Can you just elaborate a little bit again there?
Oh, sure. So it's the passive and other oriented forms of approaching the social media that is those approaches are more linked to the negative impact on one's mood disturbances. So it's more like passively scrolling through one's news feed, and then that experience can create opportunities for some comparison. Versus if you're just sending messages back and forth to a friend, that's an active approach, and that may not necessarily make you feel bad about yourself. And in fact, that might actually boost your mood because you're strengthening a social connection. But that passive approach, you're not interacting with people directly and forming meaningful connections to you outside of that platform. And so that may be more likely to negatively impact your mood.
Oh, okay. And a couple more things here. In that time of COVID, where we had so much isolation, there was a lot of unhappiness among teens also, but that came later. It was already established that the social media were having an impact on teen anxiety before that isolation started. But in your work, do you see that that isolation, did that amplify the problem that was already there, or do you see that as like a separate thing?
Well, in terms of the isolation, it decreased opportunities for youth to interact with others in person, and for all humans to do that, right? So
Right.
they're just seeing this increase in social anxiety, also just feeling this rustiness. I haven't interacted with people in person in so long. And so I think this was increase in anxiety going
Yeah,
back to school.
I
What's that
see.
going to look like? Really haven't finding their way, and feeling less rusty and feeling more confident in their ability to interact with others in person. So that was
Yeah.
something that I noticed in treatment into the community. And just in terms of, the stress of the shutdown and how that might have influenced anxiety regarding COVID, research, did find that the increase in exposure to news about the pandemic was associated with increases in anxiety. And then another study, they looked at adolescents, it was in the UK, and looked at their posts on social media sites and discovered there was a frequent discourse regarding the fear of getting others sick. So not necessarily this worry about getting sick themselves, but worried about like, what if I get one of my family members sick? What if when I'm out and about, that I'm exposing someone who is vulnerable? So that was another thing that was being observed on social media during that time.
I see. Now, when you are treating people over this period, treating these young people, are you able to see a positive result? Does the therapy seem to, and especially this self-management part of it, does that seem to end up with good results?
Regarding social media use or just treatment for
Yes,
anxiety
so
in
that,
general?
in other words, your approach is to help them understand the problem and take control here, get yourself in control of this. And so do you see that young people, especially the young teens, are able to accomplish this? Does it work?
Yes, and I think that's
Okay.
what, really exciting to see these youth really feel empowered in the sense of mastery. Like, oh, I'm not helpless. There are things that I can do to feel more in charge and to be able to have the meaningful experiences that they deserve.
Yeah.
And so it's really equipping youth with knowledge and tools so that they can then take the steps forward that they absolutely deserve to do.
Yes. So you can overcome this anxiety that apparently can be kind of disabling. You can overcome that with this kind of a strategy of learning to take control of your situation. That's the one thing. Then the other is, what can parents and teachers and political authorities, what can they do to help this situation?
So parents and educators can equip youth with the knowledge of how different types of social media use can impact one's well-being and ways to mitigate the potential negative impacts. Just the tools that I mentioned in terms of the self-assessment and the newsfeed curation, and then also re-rating your mood afterward. And so being able to, being able to take these steps to make change in their lives, that's really empowering. And so if parents and educators can share this information, then youth may be able to take these steps.
Okay, so it sounds as though you're saying that this is, there are solutions at hand. They are largely this like self-control kinds of things. So just like, although there's a lot of say, pressure from the tobacco industry to smoke or the drinking industry to drink and so on, or foods that are bad for you, if you learn self-control, you will be able to manage this. Is that the idea?
I'd say it's self-control. It's more about recognizing, if you would like to use these platforms, you still want them to be a part of your lives, how can you learn to use them in a way that at least doesn't make you feel worse? And social media is not the only component of someone's life, right? There are many other components, so there are many other strategies that one can do to also help manage their mood. We can't necessarily control our feelings, but how can we necessarily keep them in check so that you are feeling more in charge of your life and being able to do the things that are important to you and meaningful?
I see. I have one more thing before we end, and that is this the social media, or should say addiction to the phones, that is largely maybe social media. It's so ubiquitous, and you see that parents are using it as well, that people are sitting at tables at restaurants and everybody's on their phones, playing with their phones. Do you see that as a problem that is changing the way we interact, or do you think this is just something that is looks worse than it actually is?
I do think it can be problematic when, I even noticed in public transportation,
Yes,
nobody's looking up.
that's right.
Everyone's on their phone, even
Yes,
locally, right? If you ride the T, if you're in greater Boston area, everyone's on their phone and people
right.
are interacting with each other. And I think, there's something to be said about being able to interact in person and even just meet a stranger and have a pleasant interaction that can also boost your mood, and give you additional practice of talking to someone you don't know. I think if you're out and having a meal with someone, practicing being in the present moment versus posting something and being
Yes,
concerned about that can affect the interaction that you're having right then and there. So thinking of ways where you can strike a balance, right? If posting something that you've eaten is really important to you, to share that, can you take the picture and then post it later and then focus on your interaction at the table in the moment?
right. So to end with, then, you think we can do it on our own rather than impose controls on these platforms? Is that the idea? There's a lot of emphasis now on controlling the platforms themselves, doing something. In this organization, for instance, we were very concerned with disinformation. That's a big issue. So with science disinformation, then in this case, you think we, the people everywhere, can get a lock on this. We can control this without having the authorities put controls on the platforms themselves, the social media platforms?
I don't think they're mutually exclusive. I think there can be a multi-pronged approach. And there can be strategies to adjust how those platforms operate, and it, it also can be helpful to educate the community just in terms of ways that they can actually change their use in a way that might serve them. It will take, what is it, sorry, let me take a step back. It will depend on what's important to someone, right? Do they actually want to take those changes? If they're recognizing that something's making them feel worse, then they might have motivation to take steps forward to change something, and it'll depend on the user.
I see. Okay. Thank you ever so much for this very good information, and I'm glad there are people out there like you who are attending to the problem with youngsters. I hope there are plenty of people out there doing this, because it does seem to be a problem that is actually increasing. So thank you very much for joining us today, and good luck with your work with counseling the teenagers. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Okay.